a sort of quick and dirty explanation of how to go about coding notes and why it's worth doing. So there's a great scene in the movie Brazil from the 1980s where this guy, Tuttle, played here by Robert De Niro, has spent his entire life in this highly, highly bureaucratized state, avoiding bureaucracy, trying to circumvent it to get jobs done that bureaucracy gets in the way of doing. And so one feature of that is that he's also spent his entire life avoiding paperwork. And so there's this amazing scene here where we see him, in a sense, finally being overcome by all the paperwork that he's been avoiding his entire life. That it has caught up with him. He can't avoid it. He can't get away from it. And so now it's smothering him. And as we can see in just a moment, eventually it overtakes him and makes him disappear completely. Metaphorically speaking, then, this is what coding is supposed to help us avoid getting into, is getting overwhelmed, overcome by success at gathering information. So coding, in a way, then, is a way of just taking what can appear to be sort of a chaos of notes and paperwork and giving some order to it, making it useful to us in a way that that's much harder when you just have this sort of morass of disconnected notes. Now, there are different ways of doing this. And so what I offer below is just a series of suggestions for how to do this. These are not hard and fast rules. There are different approaches to how you code and what that entails. They overlap largely, at least within the social sciences. And so what I'm trying to do is just get at a few, hopefully, enabling ways of using coding to just make your life easier as you're trying to get a rein in on the bulk of the information that you've gathered. Why is this? Because, as I say here, there are some things that it's really good to learn from experience, but there are others that it's just nicer if you don't need to experience them, if you can just learn them by example, by somebody else's experience, before you have to experience yourself. It makes life better. So that's what we're after here. Now, to begin with, you might just read through all of your material in one shot. You're not pausing to add notes or to start coding at this point. You're just reading it through beginning to end. Then once you've done that, so you've got sort of the full scope of all of the data that you've collected, then go through it a second time and just start to keep a log of the themes or the topics or key phrases that you notice show up over and over again in the material. You can jot notes to yourself so that you can start to see the sorts of connections, observations, or ideas that pop to your mind. And they don't need to be well formed. You don't have to have a clear sense of where they're going just yet. You're just trying to start taking note of what is rising to the surface, let's say, with all the material that you've gathered. At this point, then, you're ready to start making your code. And so you're taking the various different responses to your research, and you're starting to sort those responses into categories. Now, here's how we get to the different ways of doing it. Perhaps you'll use, as in the picture here, different colors to correspond to particular themes, or maybe you're going to develop kind of an alphanumeric system. Whatever it is that works for you. One thing that's important, though, is you don't start with your categories and then start searching around in your material for them, that's a really good way to miss what your material is actually telling you, to miss what you've actually gathered. Instead, then, let the material show you what the categories are. This is why you read through it a couple of times, so that these things start to rise to the surface and you can begin to take note of them. So just as you wouldn't tell an interviewee how to answer your questions, but would listen to what your interviewee says and then reflect upon the importance of this for your research, you do that with the material that you've gathered as well. Don't try to impose your categories on it first. Rather, let the material teach you what the categories are. You may want to develop a more elaborate system, though. Say you find that there are certain dominant themes or dominant topics, but then there are minor ones that crop up around them that really only start to make sense or gain their importance from their connection to the dominant theme. So you could think of it, I'm using here the idea of a spider web that has this kind of central area to it with radiating webs coming out from it. You could think of it as a wheel that has a hub and then spokes radiating around from it. However it helps you think about this. What you might want to do here then is you've identified kind of a central theme, and you might want to develop then a system that uses numbers to identify the main theme. Maybe it's going to be numbers or Roman numerals. Maybe it will be numbers and letters, whatever the case may be. So as an example, say the central theme that you pick up on is change in economic situation. And you assign that number 1. That's your first main theme. So 1A might be something like a change in a state of affairs for business owners. 1B would be a change in affairs for employees. 1C then would be a code designating people who have lost or changed jobs. 1D for those who quit a job to go on unemployment. 1E for those who got fired and went on unemployment, and so on and so forth. So you can see how you'll have a central idea around economic change, and then these other ideas that connect to it and may connect to one another in some ways as well, but that they gain their coherence from their relationship to the dominant theme. Once you've applied your code to your notes, then you can quickly scan through your notes when you're writing on a particular topic, and you can find the places in your notes where that topic has come to the forefront, where that topic makes its appearance in your interviews. And this way you can also see the various different ways that it appears. So the variants on that theme as they arise, the way that you've coded them in. But remember, above all, the point of coding is to make your life easier. You make your notes quicker to scan on the one hand, so it's easier to move through your material and see what's there and see how different parts of it relate to other parts, and to clarify for yourself what your material is telling you. So on the one hand, then, you might find that as you go through and develop your coding system, you might need to adjust it in the light of things that come up later, so that maybe the way that you've developed your code initially needs some adjustment as you go. Because again, your material is going to teach you what it has to say, and your code has to reflect what your material has to say. So you may need to go back and alter the code as you draw more and more material out, and so the coding becomes more robust. But try not to make it too elaborate. You want it to be easy to use after all. You don't want to have to develop a new code just to keep track of the way that you've developed your first code. Make your life easier. So don't allow the code to become too elaborate so that it makes your life more difficult. Now, let's say that your research materials show three main areas of interest. One is how the pandemic has affected people's ability to secure a livelihood. A second is the impact it's had on people's capacity to place trust in others. And a third is how your interviewees have responded to these changes in their lives. So these are pretty broad, but I'm just trying to give you kind of a quick example of what this might look like. In your notes then, you assign code 1 to this first area with the subcodes of A, B, C, D, and E, as I described above with my example above, for business owners, employees, loss of businesses, loss of jobs, opting to take unemployment insurance, and so forth. So they will be 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D, or however it is that your material shows you need to organize these categories. You assign 2 for the second category, this loss of ability to place trust in people. And perhaps then what you find in your material is that a subsection of that or a strand connected to that will be 2A for discussions about how people have withdrawn from friends and family. Then you might find that 2B is necessary to designate how people have lost the ability to trust others to be honest about things related to the pandemic. And you can see 2A and 2B might have some relationships with one another, and that's fine. That you're developing this network so that you can see relationships between parts of your material. 2C then might be something around abandoning routine social activities or practices. Maybe that's got particular implications for how an individual thinks of himself or herself. So then these are the things that start to take shape around this idea that people have lost their ability to place trust in others. And then the third might just be this sort of open category for the different responses to these sorts of changes in people's lives as people have responded and at least maybe tried to recover from these tendencies. And so now you go through your notes and you jot these codes in the margins of your pages. Maybe you want to superimpose them in the text. You decide where you want to put them within your within the pages where you've gathered your notes, and so you just insert them wherever you find it's easiest for you to pick them out as you're flipping through your pages. So, of course, this is just one possibility, this kind of alphanumeric system. Maybe you like color coding better. Maybe it jumps off the page for you better than this. So then you might want to change the color of font for keywords or phrases that correspond to the categories that you've developed. Or maybe use a highlighting function or an actual highlighter if you're on paper to code the different sections according to the categories that you've developed. Maybe you want to just use keywords, jot keywords in the margin of the paper. The specifics of the code are really up to you. You do what's most helpful for you, but then remain alert to the ways that different networks, as you've developed your code, different networks might overlap with one another. So a particular section of your notes might be coded in more than one way, or you might apply more than one parts of your code to a particular section because it speaks to two different things. Okay, so then what now? Well, this process of coding is also kind of a way of reorganizing your thinking. The material has appeared to you in a certain way, maybe chronologically. If you've done a series of interviews, the interviews happen in a certain order, so they are chronologically organized when you first read through them. Now you're in the process of reorganizing it in new ways by theme, topic, keywords, whatever the case may be. so that things that arose at different times now belong together as they fit into a network of connections and associations. And these, again, are the networks and associations that you're detecting as you've read through your material. Another way to think of this, then, is that the work of reorganizing the material is a creative, intellectual work. You've listened to what the material is telling you, and you're forging connections between distinct regions of the material. You might want to think of this as interpretive or analytical or something along those lines. You're making sense of what your material reveals to you in the light of your particular project. If another metaphor appeals to you, here it is then. You're taking a disorganized mass of data and organizing it into coherent bundles that you can now place alongside one another in whatever way that you want, whatever makes most sense for your argument. And so that's the value of coding notes. It makes your life a lot easier. It makes your data more coherent, and it makes it much easier to search. And it will start to bring out to you what sorts of connections exist between different parts of your material that might not have been so obvious to you at the outside. Okay, I hope that's helpful anyway. So there you go, coding your notes.